Well, hello there. This week on MS Refresh, the team's co-organizer role is here, and it is underwhelming. Microsoft search verticals are also here, and they are less underwhelming. Power Apps launches their new pay-as-you-go license plan, and Microsoft launches a new sovereign cloud that we can't talk about, or we can. All that and more. Subscribe to stay in the know. This is the MS Refresh Show. Hi there, and welcome to the Matt and Sean 365 Refresh Show. This is episode 57 for the work week of March 28th, 2022. Coming to you live from the West Coast. My name is Sean Bugler.
And from the East Coast, my name is Matt Wade.
A lot of open questions there. I don't know what day it is. I don't know what year it is. I'm lucky I know who I am. Matt Wade, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm excellent. And
Good.
I am going to buck the trend of answering the question, what are you up to? How are things? With not much. That's out the window. Matt,
called out.
We did get called out, and it's great feedback.
Yep.
Matt, I'm trying to use up a plane ticket for a trip that I did not take. I was supposed to. In March 2020, I had a trip planned to go to Barcelona.
Ooh, yeah.
And for very obvious reasons, did not go to Barcelona. So we scrapped that trip, ended up getting a refund against all odds. And we just swore off international travel for, again, very obvious reasons. In September or August of last year, we've gotten our doses. We're getting ready to get boosted. We thought, sure enough, this is an okay time to, Babe Ruth it, point to the stands and say, I'm going to go to Europe. So we planned a super cheap flight to Portugal for March of 2022. Matt, do you know?
Which is now.
That is now.
It's almost done.
That is right now. And would you believe this is not a virtual background? I am still in Oakland, California. I am not in Portugal. I don't think that I'm allowed to travel internationally ever, is the lesson I'm taking from this. And so I tried to cancel the flight or rebook it or whatever. And I have to use these tickets before the end of May, because all these airlines they really tightened up their their policies with respect to getting refunds and all that. So I have to go somewhere in the next 60 days. That is where my head is at. In addition to school, in addition to work, I have a gun to my head about planning a vacation, which is a very confusing feeling.
Go to, you're on the West Coast, go to Hawaii, go to Alaska, do something like that.
Maybe. Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be if you do a huge time zone change, then you got to make it worth it. Right. So
right.
You go to Europe, especially from the West Coast, that's got to be a 7-day experience just to justify the jet lag and stuff. But if you go to
I was thinking I'll just come out to your neck of the woods in upstate New York.
I mean, you could. It's probably. I mean, today it was snowing today, actually.
Yes, still, never mind. Let's scratch that.
Exactly. So,
is anything interesting happening in your world, Matt?
So I'm hopeful, fingers crossed, that I don't get hit with the same, bad luck on travel. But we're pretty official for going to Germany in late September.
That's exciting.
Super exciting. Yep. And then next week, actually this Friday, leaving to go to Vegas for the M365 conference.
Nice. That's exciting too. How did the Teams conference or Teamsverse?
Nation.
Teams Nation.
You put Teams Nation and Comsverse together. No, Teams Nation was great. They had something like 5,000 plus registrants, which of course it's a virtual conference. So, let's assume that maybe a fifth or 2/5 of those were actually on at any given time. But I talked about Microsoft Loop for, about 45 minutes. And I think there were 130, 150 people in my session worldwide, which was, just a really good showing. They've done a lot of great work and really built up that conference to be one of the best in class out there.
That's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. I truly am, because I know it can be tough doing these virtual conferences. I think that particularly if the audience isn't there, it ends up dragging everybody down.
Yeah, totally.
No, well, I'm glad to hear that. Did you end up using the what was the title for the loop one? Did you
out of the
did
loop
you end up
question mark? Not anymore.
Love it.
Sean may have helped me on that one.
No, I'm purely.
He's like, no, that's terrible. I had nothing to do with that.
Well, Matt, why don't we get into it here? As we talked about before we went live, this is a bit of a non-traditional episode. We're in the process of kind of talking through a restructuring of our show a little bit here, because I think that the never-ending cadence from week to week of what's new on the roadmap, what's changed, what hasn't gotten here, can start to feel a little repetitive, and it leaves us saying the same things over and over and over again.
My head spins, because it's like trying to track the roadmap is just impossible, because it's ever changing. And it's very frustrating to try to follow in that respect.
And so while we're figuring out exactly what that kind of reimagined structure, which obviously will still include talking about the roadmap, is going to be, we're not freewheeling it, but it's a little bit of a looser structure as we talk about things that are a little bit more immediately relevant in the news in the world of Microsoft.
And more notable. I mean, some of these things are like really big announcements that are worth people talking about and understanding details.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, to that end, I think this is a great opportunity to kind of dive right into the first kind of marquee announcement that caught my attention earlier this week, which is that Microsoft has said to themselves, somebody in some dark room, they've gone back to Redmond. It's, behind 4 bookshelves, and you've got to whisper the super secret password into the steel vault door to get in. Somebody has said, you know what we need? Another sovereign cloud.
Said no one ever.
Said nobody ever. And yet here we are. Microsoft announced just earlier today, that Office 365 government secret cloud is now a part of the official lineup here. Now, in case you are wondering what that means, where does that fit into the whole universe? Because I would have thought Department of Defense, like the War Department would have been the top tier, but I was wrong. Turns out that the US government secret tier is a step above, and it looks to be in tandem with the DoD. Now, obviously, there's a lot more in the blog post here, but Matt, a new sovereign cloud.
So I don't think it's technically a new sovereign cloud. They didn't get into the details of it, and I know they said that the Azure version of it has existed. The sovereign cloud, to be super pedantic here, means GCC High and GCC DoD, which are roughly the same. Or no, not this. It's Azure. It's the Azure underpinning that's the same. So like you could do Teams guest access or SharePoint guest access between the two because they share the same Azure spine. So AAD can talk to each other, and that's the sovereign cloud. It's sovereign in that it doesn't, no data leaves the United States. Everybody who accesses the data centers have background checks, blah, 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 blah. The interesting thing about DoD is that it can hold up to CUI, which is a controlled unclassified information. So the key term in there is unclassified. This secret thing is going to provide a place to store classified data. Now, I assume the fact that they use the word secret means that it will hold up to DoD secret level information. There's at least 3 different levels. There's confidential, secret, top secret. Although I did see some references to top secret on the Azure side of things, but it seems like the Office 365 stuff is following after all the Azure, because again, everything is kind of built on Azure ultimately. But I'm interested to see if if the sovereign cloud that exists currently, like, is this just a portion of that, and they're going to call it IL6 and just say, it can do whatever it needs to, and the other one we don't care to make that IL6, ready, because like GCC moderate is actually could be if you actually wanted to say it is the same as GCC high and like what it can hold. It's just they don't hold themselves to those regulations because it just costs so much more to have to do it. Mainly the the data center staff in the GCC moderate is the same data centers that the commercial cloud is stored in. But otherwise, everything else technically about it is essentially equal to GCC high, except for those people, as far as I know from the history of this. But yeah, it should be interesting to see what three-letter agencies are going to say, boy, maybe it's time to get off of SharePoint 2007 and move to the cloud and somehow plug our systems into a cloud service. It'll be very interesting to see.
You do get the sense that this is very much targeted at those government agencies that do have a cloud component, whether it's managing their mail infrastructure or otherwise, but for all intents and purposes have completely separate on-prem systems that up to now they have not been able to tap into the full might and power of what Azure has to offer, what Microsoft has to offer. So it is going to be really interesting to see. Adam says, so this is where they plan to store the X files from Mulder's file cabinets, to which I can only say maybe.
I think that is still being held in a very, I don't know, dusty Lotus Notes server someplace from 1991.
That was my first technical project, was migrating information off of a Lotus Notes server. Domino, anybody? Domino?
Oh, yeah. You should not know what those terms mean. You're too young for that.
I know, it kind of hurts. You can actually see where the gray is starting to come in, just me bringing it up.
Yeah, that's fair.
So for top secret reasons, we can't go into this further. We are going to share the blog post in the show notes below once the live broadcast of this is done. For anybody that's joined live who has some perspective on this, jump in the comments. Otherwise, if you're watching this later, does this mean anything to you? We'd love to know.
Yeah.
Matt, what's caught your attention this week?
So I have been very intrigued with the rollout of the meeting co-organizer for Teams meetings, which is now available
finally here.
Yeah, man, in public preview. So I've got in the show notes a link to this blog post, which was updated on the 10th of March, first posted on the 28th of January. And the meeting co-organizer is now available. Kind of. So you had referenced that this feature is underwhelming and that the search verticals were, you said not underwhelming, which I believe would just come down to whelming. But this is definitely the underwhelming one. So this is one of those ones where it's I don't even, not that I'm saying don't roll it out until it's complete, but this is definitely a half-baked solution. And it offers a few benefits, but not the ones that people are really looking for. So if you're not quite sure what this is, so if you're in a meeting in Teams and you click on that meeting options link, and you can come in here to change who can bypass the lobby, who can present, whether or not people can use their mic or cameras. There's going to be a new one here called Choose Co-Organizers. So as long as you've invited somebody by name, it will not work for if you have distribution groups or AD groups that you email out to invite people easier. It will not be smart enough to be able to pull a name out, at least from my experience. But if you have an individual that has been called out, you can type their name in and then choose them, and they can be a co-organizer with you. You can also, it seems, choose somebody from the outside. This user right here happens to be somebody in a different tenant, but it's still in O360 or M365. And these people are going to have similar features to you, but critically, they will not have some. So let's talk about what they can do. First thing that really matters is they're going to be able to manage the meeting options. All right, so that's that page. So they can go in here, change who can get stuck in the lobby, who's able to use their microphone or their camera. But what they're and what else they're going to be able to do, and they've kind of pointed out in this blog post, is they're going to be able to bypass the lobby themselves. They're going to be able to admit people from the lobby, lock the meeting, present content, change the roles, and do some management of breakout rooms, which all of that means they're just a presenter. So that doesn't even really offer a whole lot of value to begin with. But one thing that will change is that the meeting options for who can present and who can bypass the lobby, if it's going to default to only me, or you're going to change or choose only me, you're going to see that the option is only me and co-organizers. So there's no more option for just me. It's going to be you and your co-organizers. But the things that it can't do, you cannot get an attendance report as a co-organizer. You can't manage the meeting recording as a co-organizer. You can't edit or control the meeting invite, which I always kind of figured that was going to be the big deliverable was, finally, somebody's leaving the organization. They have a never-ending every 2-week project status meeting that they run. We're not going to have to cancel that meeting and reschedule it, but with somebody else now moving forward. Nope, you are. That's not coming as part of this deliverable. You can't change the organizer's role. You can't change that person to like not be involved at all and take over. So that's another thing. And you can't set up breakout rooms ahead of time, which like that was one of the major things that, especially education, they wanted to be able to have a co-teacher or a substitute be able to come in and do the breakout room setup if they needed to. There's also a couple sort of weird things that came about just from testing. First off, the concept of delegates, like if a manager has an assistant, that assistant can be a delegate for that manager, and that assistant is able to schedule meetings on behalf of that manager. Well, when they do that, the assistant is not actually the organizer of the meeting. The manager is. So the assistant cannot set themselves as the co-organizer. They have to schedule the meeting on behalf of the manager, and the manager has to go into the meeting options and set the assistant as the co-organizer to get the features. So it's just crazy to me that you can't set the co-organizer when you're inviting people and say like, hey, to CC, BCC, or whatever, or no, invitation and optional, right? Why isn't there one field for co-organizer now in Outlook and Teams so that at the time that you're actually scheduling it, that's when you choose co-organizer? Because people forget to go in meeting options all the time. So if you leave for vacation after setting up a meeting and you're like, oh yeah, I got to do that thing in meeting options, and then you forget because everybody does, and then you leave, ain't no fixing it. And you can't do meeting options from your cell phone yet. You'd have to do it some, pitch and Zoom, I guess, in Safari or Edge or whatever. But so that's essentially why this is an underwhelming deliverable. It is in public preview. There's a link in the show notes on how to enable public preview in Teams if you're not sure how to do that. But toy with it, see how you think it works, and if it meets your needs. Kind of curious.
Yeah, I would love to hear from those of you who watch the show whether this scratches the itch, because I think, Matt, I always thought it was overly optimistic that we would finally see the ability to manage Outlook events. And I think to that end, everything we're seeing, every disappointing, nope, still can't do that.
Yeah.
Wall continues to be us bursting at the seams of this legacy infrastructure in exchange of what a calendar event is.
Mm-hmm.
Because, calendar events are ultimately just mail objects.
Yeah.
So it's disappointing. It's unsurprising. I continue to hope that there's some skunkworks project that's buried even deeper than the ones that decided there was going to be a secret tier of Office 365 government that is working on the next kind of frontier of managing events. What is that supposed to look like? Because
if that was the entire metaverse deliverable, I would be so happy.
If it was that and peg people, I think we'd all be in.
I'll be pegless.
So I hope, obviously it's still in preview. The hope is we'll still get a couple of those things, like attendance reports feels like an oversight, for example. But TBD, at a minimum, I think general availability should be able to one-to-one. What does Zoom co-organizer status give you? Mm-hmm. Teams should at least meet that. And there are a couple of areas where that's not the case.
Yeah, agreed. One other quick comment on this, and it's not just about this guy. I've seen plenty of others who still have it, but I love when I see the parentheses link in the person's name to clarify that they're not. No, I know there's other people with my same name, but I'm the one that's in the link team, and it's like, oh, link.
It's funny to imagine that there might still, obviously there are still plenty of hooks where link is still the thing. And of course, as Mac users, ding, ding, as Mac users, we were one of the last ones to see link.
Yeah. So yeah, you really know that, I don't know. It's underwhelming. Anyway, what else is new on your list that you happen to see?
Yeah, so we'll make this one quick. Microsoft has announced general availability of pay-as-you-go for Power Apps. This is nice. We talked about some of the challenges of licensing last week with respect to Power Automate, but a lot of those same complaints very easily scale up to Power Apps as you create more and more overly onerous licensing terms that, sure, get Microsoft paid. You really kind of stretch how comfortable a beginner is trying something new. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm accidentally, if I'm trying something new in an account and I accidentally tap into a a premium feature,
That's scary.
Yeah, that's scary. And I think to that end, that might ward people off. Kind of the antithesis of what citizen developers should be thinking about. Citizen developers should not have to think about licensing. They should just have to think, I have a problem. I would like to solve that problem. And all these fancy, shiny, jazzy videos tell me I can also solve that problem. So with that, the Microsoft announced this a couple months ago. I want to say it back at Ignite, but we're just seeing it hit general availability. The ability to associate Power Apps with a pay-as-you-go plan in Azure. So you can use an Azure subscription to pay for Power Apps based on the active usage of the apps instead of purchasing and allocating licenses. And now that still costs money, but particularly as an organization, when you're thinking about just trying out an idea, if you have to pay for that app outright, that's really hard to create the justification for. And so at a minimum, these pay as you go, let me try and build something. It's just going to be me tinkering around in there. I'm going to, generate a couple bucks a month, maybe, in charges. Lets us explore whether we can find ideas that stick. And inevitably, as they scale, if we identify, okay, with this pay as you go Azure subscription, we're starting to pay a fair amount, maybe it starts to make sense to license it on a per app or a per user basis. So
and I'm totally going to use, like, when I start to propose solutions like this within my organization and with my clients, I'm absolutely going to use this graphic that they provided, because I just think that speaks so well to management as to how much something costs.
I couldn't agree more. And I think to that end,
it costed 3 people this month.
I think to that end, this is probably the most reasonable licensing model we can expect out of Microsoft for quite some time. I think that the days of paying for a per user license and that being able to spin up, infinite numbers of apps that I can then share with an organization and leverage at scale, those days are gone. Microsoft has now identified that this is an absolute cash cow. So the pay-as-you-go plan is a good idea. I'm optimistic that this could be beneficial for organizations and not completely scare away citizen developers as they try to solve new problems.
It's kind of interesting too, because the pay-as-you-go model was always what Logic Apps was built on, and basically Power Automate is just a Control C, Control V of Logic Apps, but put in the hands of not just Azure people, right?
Right.
And I think you said that it already is or is coming to Power Automate as well, and that was always an easy differentiator. People would ask me, like, "Oh, when would I use Power Apps or Power Automate versus Logic Apps?" And it's like, well, the costing is a way different way of doing things between the two. So this might make it a little bit more difficult, especially for the IT folks who are like, well, should I do this in Power Automate? It's like, I don't know. Do you want it to be more accessible to other, do you want to share ownership of it with somebody who's not an Azure admin? Like, that's helpful.
Yeah. And it opens the door to sharing costs within departments as an example of that.
Yeah, true that.
Budget on a per department basis. And I think that there's some really great opportunities there. I will be interested to see what this looks like in practice. I know that for me as a government agency, it's really hard for us to budget in those respects for apps. 2 months into a fiscal year, I may have some mandate to create an app. It's really hard to suddenly come up with the money for that. But if we're starting every year with, X number blanket bucket of money that I can leverage on a pay-as-you-go subscription, that can actually go a really long way in getting us to the end of a fiscal year where I can budget on a per app basis.
There's actually the opposite argument to be made as well, where it's, if I pay for the license, at least I know what I'm paying because it's a flat fee, versus if it's something that's consumption, I don't know what it's going to cost necessarily. I can tell you that, like, the Azure calculator has never actually been very helpful for me. And I'm sure they're going to have something similar to that. But even especially as a government organization, sometimes it just comes down to, you need to give a dollar amount and you need to justify what that's for. And if you can't really justify it, it's more like, well, we don't know yet. It's going to be, it could be anywhere between here and here, but it's like you have to spend the money if you're a government organization. Otherwise, you don't get it next year. And you can't just like give it back or roll it over. Like that's not a concept in government typically.
Right.
So it'd be kind of interesting to see how, especially in the government side of things, how people look at it, because I could see it both ways.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. It'll be interesting to see. I think that, for me, it's a great opportunity to tap into the Skunkworks, bootstrap concept of, I don't know what exists at the start of the fiscal year. So being able to set aside, in a training budget, for example, $500 or $1,000 or $10,000 and say, this is how much we have to goof around, to find some new idea to get us to that next fiscal year and say, okay, in those 12 months, we came up with a really good idea, which we will now pay for by the app. Carolyn says, wouldn't it also help to get the citizen developers to use the free developer tenant to play and then use the export feature to launch and also allow you to identify who the real quote unquote citizen developers are? It's a good question. It's a good point. And I would say, yes, this is a great opportunity for us to talk about the fact that you absolutely can tap into the free developer tenant and leverage that. The community plan that exists out there is really great for citizen developers, but I will argue that there's no greater way to test whether your idea will work within an organization than to build something that you can share with a colleague, that they can click on, that they can go through the onboarding experience and tap into real data within the organization, for better or for worse. But to that end, yeah, I mean, in terms of us nerds, developer tenant all the way. I built the dumbest things in my developer tenant.
We don't talk about those. Those are
no. But yeah, and then the last thing that I wanted to share here as we're closing up is search verticals. And so, funny enough, Carolyn asked this question before the show started: have verticals arrived in Microsoft Search? And if yes, can they be SharePoint metadata? Apologies if you have already answered this in a previous session. We had not, Carolyn. We had not addressed this. And
I can't remember the last time we took a deep dive in Search in a long time.
Yeah. And so this is a really great question. And funny enough, Carolyn, just this morning, Mikhail, who is the principal program manager for Microsoft Search at Microsoft, tweeted at 1 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, custom verticals in Microsoft Search with SharePoint content is finally available to everyone, asterisked, everyone in a commercial tenant. So apologies, GCC high, although he does go on to say that is one of the highest priorities this year for his team, is to get that out there to.
Honestly, I can't complain about SharePoint in the GCC experience, because it's typically the quickest to get routed to GCC tenants. It's Teams that I want to strangle somebody over. But yeah.
So yeah, so the question, Carolyn, yes, search verticals are available starting today. And in fact, I went ahead and logged into my own developer tenant just to check and see if it was available in mine. And let me go ahead and jump in there. Let me just expand that out here. Jump into my Search and Intelligence Admin Center here. And sure enough, here within customizations, verticals are now available. Now, this is something, full disclosure, I don't pay a lot of attention to what's happening in the Microsoft Search, despite thinking that Microsoft Search is one of the coolest things that's happening in the Microsoft 365 universe. There's a lot of really interesting things happening here. I haven't really been paying a lot of attention to verticals specifically. But as it turns out, there's a lot of really interesting things that you can do right out of the gate. Namely, you can actually enable and disable the existing verticals that are there and customize them further. So for example, Power BI is not a really big part of my organization, so I can actually disable it as a search vertical within my organization's search. But beyond the bounds of that here, you now have the ability to create new ones. So I can go ahead and, important content will be the name of the vertical here. I don't give good demo examples here. What's really cool about this here is, in addition to being able to choose SharePoint content, you can also leverage external connectors, third-party connectors. So whether that's Azure DevOps, ServiceNow, you can also purchase connectors from other organizations. So I know that Box, on-prem local network drives or shared network drives. Those are something you can connect to these as well. There's a lot of really interesting things that you can do with a search vertical that allow you to tap into institutional and organizational information that may go beyond the bounds of SharePoint. Not every organization is all in that space just yet. But for the sake of argument here, Carolyn, your question, can we leverage SharePoint metadata? You do technically have the ability to tap into a couple of different things here using KQL. I will be the first one to tell you, I don't know anything about writing KQL queries except
they're
really
not super hard though. If I can do it, anybody can do it. It sounds way more scary than it really is.
Yeah. Well, you heard it here. You heard it here first, folks. Give it to me in the UI. It says KQL queries are accessible.
I mean, it's well documented, at least. That's the one, as long as you give me examples of how this stuff works, then
I would agree. Mm-hmm. So in addition to KQL queries, you have the ability to filter even further, giving users the ability to filter after they've run their initial search. And there's some really cool things that you can tap into here. So for those of you who don't have a SharePoint developer tenant, oops, removing you. For those of you who don't have a Microsoft 365 developer tenant, this is your call to action. Go create one. We'll drop a link in the show notes where you can create your own M365 sandbox. It's really easy to get started with these custom verticals. We're going to also drop a link in the show notes to the documentation for creating Microsoft search verticals. But man, I'm excited. This is, thanks of course to Carolyn for your question. This is something I'm going to go screw around with.
Yeah, same. You were
right
talking
after
about this.
We're done here.
Yeah, you were talking about this before we started, and it was like, wait, you can do all that? Like, I feel like search is one of those like just silent underpinnings that like nobody really, unless you're like a search optimization person, you don't really touch a lot with search, and you might do a little bit, but that's a lot of really cool out of the box stuff that, obviously that's an improvement. I can just add that with, why do I even talk to anybody? If I have like, if we have a set, metadata strategy, or we have like a term set, where I want to be able to find certain documents, those verticals are literally tabs at the top, right? That's why they're called verticals. Right. And if I don't use Power BI, get rid of that. But like, maybe I want to be able to filter and just look at all contracts as my search result, or request for proposal, or whatever like document type is typical for the organization, and you are already tagging it as such. Like, that's really handy.
It's such a big deal. And I continue to think, and I want to say it was right when we were starting the year off and making our predictions for what we thought was going to be kind of the big focus for Microsoft. I said Microsoft Search was kind of my dark horse vote for most interesting updates. And I don't want to say that I'm right yet, but I think that we're off to a really good start. And continuing to see things like the organization search, the improved people experience. Those are all really great examples of Microsoft investing in the search experience beyond the micro purchasey syntax stuff.
Yeah, the nickel and diming aspects out there.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's all I've got. Anything else on your end, Matt?
No, I think that probably does it. Other than I will send a quick last minute reminder. Next week is the Microsoft 365 conference in Las Vegas. I find it to be crazy that I would remind people that they can still purchase their tickets to do that a week early or a week beforehand. But I have been told that many conferences that I go to, that sometimes they will get up to a third of their attendance based on the last week of open enrollment or purchase, which to me is crazy because I've always worked for places that like you had to have that budgeted out like 18 months in advance, right? Like the event wasn't even scheduled yet and you had to say that you're going to go to it, right? So if you're interested, there is a link in the show notes to reserve now. Should be a really good one. I think a lot of these conferences are just kind of working on their way to come back, but I know I was at the one in December and that was really good. Especially considering December was right when the sort of the COVID comeback in the US was happening. But I think travel is significantly safer right now. And I think everybody's just kind of itching to get back out and be around people and have a good time and all that stuff. So if you're interested, there's a link down below to check out the different ticket options. And I'll be covering some sessions on Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Loop. It's a fun topic, actually, kind of getting into that. But Anyway, all right. Well, I think that just about does it. Thanks so much for watching. As always, a like and subscribe is much appreciated. Leave a comment below to continue the discussion. If you're interested when we do sessions live, you can leave comments ahead of time and also comment during the session. So we do these on Monday evenings Eastern time. I will say next week we'll be off.
Oh yeah, we should mention that.
But we'll be back the week after to continue on with covering all that good stuff in the Message Center. And yeah, Sean, thanks so much for joining me this week, and I can't wait to hang out with you and everyone again in the next time, which should be 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks. 1, 2.
Peace.